Imagine, for a moment, the ultimate modern Sigma male tech CEO. You know the type. Wakes up at 3 o'clock a.m. to take an ice bath, drinks a smoothie made of raw eggs and pulverized cryptocurrency, and constantly posts on LinkedIn about how sleeping is a sign of weakness. Now, take that guy, teleport him back to the late 1970s, give him a dangerously sharp chin implant, an ego the size of Jupiter, and an obsession with stainless steel. Meet John DeLorean. He wasn't just a car executive, he was a walking, talking monument to unchecked male hubris. He was a brilliant engineer who designed the legendary Pontiac GTO, effectively inventing the American muscle car. But John had a problem. Working for General Motors meant taking orders from guys named Eustace, who wore gray flannel suits and thought a thrilling Friday night was doing their taxes early. John's ego simply could not be contained within the corporate structure of GM. He was dating supermodels. He was hanging out with Hollywood elites. He had his jaw reconstructed to look more heroic. Literally, he bought himself a superhero chin. So, what does a guy with a god complex do when he outgrows the biggest automaker on the planet? He quits. He tells the establishment to kick rocks, and he sets out to build the ultimate futuristic, world-beating sports car, a car bearing his own name, the DeLorean DMC-12. It was a beautiful dream, a vehicle that would revolutionize the streets, a car that looked like a UFO that had gently landed in a Wendy's parking lot. But there was a catch. John DeLorean's stubbornness and absolute refusal to compromise turned his dream into an engineering nightmare of catastrophic proportions. And when that nightmare inevitably drove his company to the brink of total financial ruin, John didn't downsize. He didn't file for Chapter 11. No! Our guy decided the best way to save his failing startup was to casually bankroll a $24 million cocaine smuggling operation. Yeah, you heard me. Welcome to the story of the DeLorean Motor Company, the only automaker in history that tried to use the cartel as venture capitalists. To understand the sheer scale of the disaster, you have to understand the car John wanted to build. The DMC-12 wasn't supposed to just be a car. It was supposed to be a revolution. And John, being the visionary genius he firmly believed he was, laid down some non-negotiable ground rules for its design. Rule number 1, it absolutely had to have gull wing doors. Why? Because they look fucking sick. That's why. Never mind the fact that gull wing doors are an engineering nightmare. They are heavy. They require incredibly complex and expensive gas struts just to stay open. And if you happen to roll the car over in an accident, congratulations, you are now trapped inside a very stylish steel coffin. But John didn't care about the physics of rolling over. Sigma males don't roll their cars. They simply command gravity to ignore them. Rule number 2, the car could not be painted. It had to be made entirely out of brushed stainless steel. Now, stainless steel is great for many things. Refrigerators, surgical scalpels, kitchen sinks. But for a car, it's a terrible idea. For one, stainless steel is incredibly heavy. It weighs roughly the same as a dying star. Secondly, it is impossible to repair. If you get a dent in a normal car, a mechanic pops it out, uses some Bondo, and paints over it. If you dent a DeLorean, you basically have to buy a new DeLorean or hire a master metallurgist who trained under a dwarven blacksmith in Middle Earth to forge you a new panel. And worst of all, stainless steel is the ultimate fingerprint magnet. If you even looked at a DeLorean too hard, it would develop a smudge. DeLorean owners didn't go to the auto parts store for car wax. They went to the grocery store to buy industrial quantities of Windex and Scotch-Brite pads. But John insisted it had to be stainless. It had to have the doors. It was his vision. Unfortunately, these visionary choices meant that the chassis had to be completely redesigned to support the sheer crushing weight of a stainless steel body and heavy doors. The car was getting heavier and fatter and more complicated by the day, which brings us to the most hilarious tragedy of the DMC-12, the engine. When you look at a DeLorean, your brain immediately tells you this thing goes 200 miles per hour and probably shoots lasers. Its sleek design by Italian legend Giorgetto Giugiaro screams pure speed. But beneath that futuristic, aggressive exterior beat the heart of a sleepy, asthmatic golden retriever. Because John had spent all his money figuring out how to make doors go up instead of out, and buying enough stainless steel to construct a small battleship, he had no money left to develop a good engine. After scrambling around and failing to secure a decent powertrain, DeLorean had to settle for the PRV V6. The PRV was an engine jointly developed by Peugeot, Renault, and Volvo. Now, when you think of blistering, face-melting speed, you definitely think of a 1970s Volvo, right? The engine produced a microscopic 130 horsepower in a car that, thanks to its stainless steel armor, weighed nearly 3,000 pounds. The resulting performance was not just bad, it was comedy. The DMC-12 had a 0 to 60 time of roughly 10.5 seconds. For context, that meant this spaceship from the future could legitimately lose a drag race to a standard wood-paneled station wagon filled with groceries and a screaming toddler. A 0 to 60 time of 10.5 seconds isn't acceleration. That's a gentle suggestion of forward momentum. You didn't push the gas pedal in a DeLorean. You submitted a formal request for speed and waited 3 to 5 business days for processing. But John didn't pivot. He didn't say, hey guys, maybe we should use fiberglass so the car doesn't weigh as much as a bank vault. He pushed forward because, again, hubris. By the late 70s, John was running out of money before he even built a single car. He needed a factory and he needed a government desperate enough to give him free cash to build it. Enter the British government. At the time, Belfast, Northern Ireland was dealing with severe economic depression and intense sectarian conflict, a period known as the Troubles. The British government was desperate to create jobs and bring stability to the region. So when a slick-talking American with a superhero chin promised to build a futuristic car factory and employ thousands of locals, they threw over $100 million at him. It was a beautiful idea in theory. In practice, it was a spectacular disaster. John DeLorean took a bunch of people, many of whom had never worked in a manufacturing plant before, let alone built a highly complex stainless steel gull-winged sports car, and said, all right, lads, figure it out. The early production models were absolute junk. Quality control wasn't just bad, it was a theoretical concept that hadn't yet been introduced to the factory floor. The doors wouldn't seal properly, meaning if it rained, and let me remind you, this car was built in Ireland, the interior would instantly turn into a small swimming pool. The electrical systems were notoriously buggy. Alternators failed, stranding drivers on the side of the road. Famously, when Johnny Carson, one of the first celebrity investors in the company, received his DeLorean, it broke down almost immediately. There is nothing worse for your brand's PR than the king of late-night television having to call a tow truck because his spaceship's alternator gave up the ghost. By 1982, the writing was on the wall. A massive global recession hit. The car was priced at an exorbitant $25,000, which is about $80,000 in today's money, for a vehicle that couldn't outrun a golf cart and leaked when it drizzled. Sales absolutely tanked. Cars were piling up in lots unsold. The British government cut off the funding. The company was bleeding millions of dollars a week. The DeLorean Motor Company was literally days away from complete bankruptcy and liquidation. Most CEOs in this situation would call their lawyers, file Chapter 11, write a somber LinkedIn post about lessons learned, and move on to ruining a different industry. But John DeLorean was not most CEOs. John was a Sigma, and a Sigma doesn't quit. A Sigma finds alternative revenue streams. In the summer of 1982, John DeLorean was desperate. He needed roughly $17 million to keep his company afloat, and no bank on earth would lend him a dime. Through a bizarre series of connections, John was put in touch with a man named James Hoffman. Hoffman was a former neighbor of John's, but more importantly, he was a known drug smuggler. Even more importantly, though John didn't know it at the time, Hoffman was an active, paid informant for the FBI. Hoffman presented John with a business proposition. It was a classic venture capital pitch, really. Just your standard Series B funding round. The pitch was this. John would put up roughly $1.8 million as seed capital. In exchange, he would help finance the importation of 100 kilos, roughly 220 pounds, of pure, unadulterated Colombian cocaine. Once the snow hit the streets of Los Angeles, it would generate over $24 million in profit. John would take his cut, pump the drug money straight into his failing car company, and keep the dream alive! Now, let's pause and think about this for a second. You are a 57-year-old former General Motors executive. You wear tailored suits. You have a factory in Ireland. Someone comes to you and says, "Hey man, you want to become a cartel kingpin to save your car company?" The correct answer is no. I will declare bankruptcy and go play golf. John's answer was basically, say hello to my little friend. Over the next few months, John met with Hoffman and several other drug lords to finalize the deal. Unfortunately for John, these drug lords were actually undercover FBI and DEA agents. The climax of this absolute clown show occurred on October 19, 1982 at the Sheraton Plaza Hotel near LAX. John DeLorean walked into room 501 believing he was about to finalize the deal that would save his empire. An undercover agent casually placed a briefcase on the table and popped the latches. Inside were vacuum-sealed bags of pure cocaine. John, wearing a sharp suit and sporting his millionaire chin, looked at the briefcase full of illegal narcotics. Did he panic? Did he realize he was in too deep? No. According to the FBI recordings, John looked at the cocaine, smiled, and uttered a line so incredibly cheesy it belongs in a B movie. He said, "It's better than gold. Gold weighs more than that, for God's sake." It was the ultimate business guy attempting to sound cool in a drug deal. He didn't even know what to say, so he just compared its weight to value ratio to precious metals. Moments after he uttered that legendary quote, the door burst open. The FBI swarmed the room. They slapped the cuffs on the great John DeLorean. Within hours, the news broke worldwide. The brilliant engineer, the rebel of the auto industry, the man who promised the car of the future had been busted in a dingy airport hotel room trying to move cartel weight. Exactly 1 week later, the DeLorean Motor Company officially declared bankruptcy. The British government seized the factory. The dream was dead, suffocated under a mountain of stainless steel, bad decisions, and Colombian marching powder. Now, you'd think this is where John goes to federal prison for the rest of his natural life, right? Wrong. Because John DeLorean's life was a movie written by a madman, he actually got away with it. During his trial in 1984, John's high-priced defense attorneys successfully argued a case of police entrapment. They argued that the FBI through their informant James Hoffman, had aggressively targeted and coerced a desperate, financially ruined businessman who had no prior criminal record into committing a crime he wouldn't have otherwise committed. And the jury bought it. John DeLorean was acquitted of all charges. He walked out of the courtroom a free man. But while he beat the rap, he couldn't beat the reality of his situation. He was publicly disgraced. His reputation was radioactive, and his car company was a smoldering crater. About 9,000 DMC-12s had been built, and they were widely considered to be an underpowered, overpriced joke. The DeLorean was destined to be nothing more than a weird footnote in automotive history, a cautionary tale about corporate hubris, until 1985. When director Robert Zemeckis and writer Bob Gale were developing Back to the Future, they originally planned for the time machine to be an old refrigerator, but they realized that kids might actually lock themselves in fridges trying to time travel. So they decided to make the time machine a car, and they needed a car that looked like an alien spaceship so that when it crashed into a barn in 1955, the farmer would believe it was a UFO. They looked at the DeLorean. With its unpainted stainless steel and those ridiculous gull-wing doors, it was utterly perfect. But here is the ultimate delicious irony of the DeLorean's cinematic immortality. In the movie, Doc Brown famously tells Marty that if you're going to build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style? But the actual technical reason the DeLorean was chosen by the filmmakers? It's because the plot required a car that looked incredibly fast, but was famously, hilariously slow. Think about it. The entire tension of Back to the Future is about trying to get the car up to 88 miles per hour. If Doc Brown had built the time machine out of a Porsche or a Corvette, the movie would be 5 minutes long. Marty would tap the gas, hit 88 in the mall parking lot, and be home in time for dinner. Because John DeLorean was so obsessed with stainless steel that he built an overweight, underpowered disaster of a car, it took Marty McFly an entire street length and a lightning strike just to hit highway speeds. The car's greatest engineering failure became its greatest cinematic asset. John DeLorean passed away in 2005. He lived to see his great catastrophic failure become one of the most beloved and recognizable cultural icons on the planet. Millions of people adore the DeLorean today, completely unaware that it was born from a cocktail of unchecked ego, massive design flaws, and a desperate last-minute cocaine scheme. Which just goes to show you, if you fail hard enough and you fail weird enough, history might just mistake you for a genius. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the absolute madness of automotive history, do me a massive favor and hit that subscribe button down below. Would you drive a DeLorean? Or do you prefer your cars to go 0 to 60 before your next birthday? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, keep your doors down, your stainless steel polished, and whatever you do, do not try to fund your startup with cartel snow. Thanks for watching!